Today's episode of Educators Without Borders is sponsored by Forefront Education, who creates solutions to collect and analyze results from classroom assessments. Visit them at forefront.education to learn more.
This episode of Educators Without Borders is made possible by Ed2Market, a complete go-to-market strategy for K-12 authors, speakers, consultants, and thought leaders. Learn more at ed2market.com.
Somewhere out there, in a classroom or staying up late at home, a teacher is planning that next great lesson that will inspire and change a child's life. Whether they're looking for new, innovative ways to engage and motivate students or connecting learning to real life in a hands-on way, it's always with the end in mind and the context of global citizenship and advancing our humanity. Join us on our search for leading voices in education across the globe as we convene to talk about the topics that matter and inspire all educators in the pursuit of that next great lesson. Welcome to Educators Without Borders, presented by SchoolRubric.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Educators Without Borders, presented by SchoolRubric. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. My name is Lindsay Prendergast, and I'm honored to be the host of today's panel entitled Assessment Reimagined. What have we learned? Where do we go next? We have an exciting discussion ahead of us with a few leading experts on this theme. We're really all looking forward to empowering you, our viewers, with the mindsets and practices that you can apply immediately in your classrooms and schools, starting tomorrow even, to better serve every single student. I want to say another big thank you to our sponsors that make this event possible, Katie Stoddard and Ed2Market, as well as Forefront Education for supporting the mission of SchoolRubric and Educators Without Borders through today's panel. We have a lot of people tuning in live today. We'd love for you to let us know where you are. Where are you watching from? The SchoolRubric producers will throw that up on the screen. Also, as we hear from our guests, if you have a reaction or a question, feel free to share. We can also put that up on the screen, and our panelists will definitely check in with you and answer. I'm also excited to share that we have a giveaway on the show today. One of our generous contributors to SchoolRubric work, David Frangiosa, and his colleague Elise Burns have recently published a book called Going Gradeless, Shifting the Focus to Student Learning in Grades 6 through 12. Our producers will be dropping a link in the chat where you're viewing today. Simply click on the link and you'll be entered in a chance to win a free copy of that book. So before we get into this exciting discussion, let's take a minute, take a few brief introductions. Let's get to know our colleagues, our panelists that are here to share a little bit about the work that they do in education. We have a diverse panel today, authors, college professors, passionate assessment reformers joining us. It's my pleasure to share a little bit about the expertise of each of these individuals who support all educators out there ready to refine their assessments and practices, supporting all students. So I'm going to start with Starr. I'd like to share a little bit about your background, and then I'll offer you a chance to tell our viewers about some of your passions. So Starr Sackstein is with us today from New York. She's a national board certified teacher, a well-known author, a dedicated reformer of traditional assessment and grading practices. You might have seen her recent book release that just came out, Assess with Respect. And I'll say the title alone speaks volumes to Starr's philosophy around student-centered practice. Starr travels the world to support classroom teachers like those of you out there today, school leaders, in making that meaningful shift towards equitable, learning-focused assessment, teaching, and learning. I'll have to say one of my favorite quotes from one of Starr's books, Hacking Assessment, has always been, it's important to remember that school is about our students, not us. The more we can empower them to be in control of their learning, the better. Starr, I'd love to give you a chance to just share a little bit more about the audience besides your professional experience. Anything you'd like them to know about you and your passions?
I would say that I am a huge assessment nerd, and that nerdiness doesn't only apply to assessment. As a high school English and journalism teacher, I was extremely passionate about helping students understand the world that we live in and letting them grapple with what's going on there. And now, as a mom of a 15-year-old, almost 16-year-old, I'm watching what he's learning in school and sometimes biting my tongue when I hear what's going on there. But I hope my big picture dream is to really shift the way we do assessment in the United States, move away from standardized testing because our kids are anything but standard. So,
well said. Thank you. And it's a pleasure having you here with us today, Starr. Speaking my language when you say assessment nerd, I would say I am the same. So thank you. And Dr. Jeff Rhodes joining us today from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where he is a university learning facilitator in the doctoral program at Drexel University for educational leadership and change, among other titles and roles. Dr. Rhodes has been an assistant superintendent, a principal, and a regional program director. I know firsthand that he's an avid supporter of cultivating leadership skills in new and aspiring and experienced administrators. And for over 20 years, he has served as a mentor, a coach, and an advisor to countless education leaders. Dr. Rhodes brings his profound passion, his positivity to his work, serving both students and educators, and it's truly an honor having him here with us today. Dr. Rhodes, I know the audience would love to also hear a little bit more about what excites you, or perhaps something you're proud of. Would you share with them a little bit more today about what do you care? What are you passionate about?
I do. Thank you so much, Lindsay. There are so many things I'm passionate about, but similar to Starr, I just think that all this work that we're doing around how can we improve learning outcomes for our students is what's most important, is what's most critical. I see myself as an organizational learning theorist and systems thinker, and I think it's critically important that when we think of large systems, that we recognize that they are not outside of us, that we are the systems. And so this change that we're seeking begins with us. So you're going to hear today a lot of my comments about how we work within systems and we're part of systems, but the really change is us. It's about how we think. And so issues around equity, there's nothing more important than equity. How do we not treat each other as human beings fairly? And how do we not treat our young people, our students who are our future, fairly? And I think another piece that's critically important that I definitely want to make to share today is to talk about culture. And I think that, the situation that we've all been placed in as a result of the pandemic is going to give us an opportunity to talk about culture in ways that we haven't really considered. And I think that's going to be critically important, particularly to this conversation. So I'm just glad to be here with my fellow panelists and look forward to having a rich and engaging conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'm excited to hear. I could not agree more. And I saw a lot of nodding heads from our fellow panelists here today that we are all part of these greater systems and we play a great role in influencing them. Thank you. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Matt Townsley. I'm sure many of you out there know of him as well. He's a well-known assessment and grading enthusiast, which I love the word enthusiast because I can say from experience, grading enthusiasts are a rare breed. But you may have read his book, Making Grades Matter, Standards-Based Grading in a Secondary PLC. And if you haven't, I recommend you do. He co-authored that book with Nathan Ware. Matt's been a district administrator as well, a classroom teacher, where he has both implemented and led the work of substantial improvement to grading and assessment practices in a school district. He's now an assistant professor of ed leadership at the University of Northern Iowa, another leading practitioner who travels to work with schools across the country and to support those efforts to shift practice and better serve students one conversation at a time. Matt, we're super pleased to have you joining all of us today as well, sharing your diverse background with our viewers. And also I'll give you an opportunity, aside from the experiences I've described, what might you like to let the audience know about yourself as a leader, educator, or in your other life experiences?
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. Yeah, it's just a pleasure to be here with Jeff and Starr. It's good. have 4 kids, which keep me on my toes from 3rd grade on down to 2 years old. So if I look like a dad in the central time zone this morning, it's because I'm a dad in the central time zone this morning on a Monday, which is fantastic. Like Lindsay said, I've been a classroom teacher, a math teacher, and I kind of saw this whole grading assessment thing like through a mathematical lens. I tend to think about like how many points are students earning in the classroom. Then, just to make a long story short, I attended a math teacher conference where I was kind of pushed to think more about learning than earning. And so I started reading books, like by Ken O'Connor and Tom Gusky and people like that. And it really changed my paradigm to think less quantitatively about earning points and more qualitatively about learning. And so now I try to pass on those ideas to folks in our Ed Leadership program, the future principals and superintendents in Iowa and around the world. And of course, as Lindsay said, work with schools and places like that too to help grading practices improve. So excited to be here today.
I love it. And I say right now amongst us, we have 3 servant leaders who are out there helping other educators one conversation at a time. Thank you.
Well, Lindsay, we got folks from like all around the world here. I did not anticipate this. Philippines, Taiwan, Canada. I mean, shout out to my friends in Canada, eh? Awesome.
Exactly.
Super cool. Wow.
Ken O'Connor is here.
Wow.
We have folks from Tennessee. And I'll mention Colin Brown in Taiwan is my former boss and a dear friend whom I learned more or less everything I know about standards-based grading.
Is that like middle of the night? I don't even know. Is that middle of the night over there? Jeez.
It's nighttime.
Jeez. Man, I'd be putting the kids to bed or something. Wow.
Yeah, right? Exactly. There's no sleep for educators though, right?
Jeez, that's fantastic.
No, it's great. We love that. So, and welcome to all of our viewers out there. We're so excited to get started today. What an amazing team of thought leaders alongside me here. So I bet you're all as excited as I am to soak up the ideas and insights from this team. Let's get started with our first question coming to us from Carla Mayrink. She's head of school at the Community for Learning in Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic.
Hi, I'm Carla Mayrink, and I'm the head of school at the Community for Learning in Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic. I'm very curious to know what the panel thinks are some of the key flaws in traditional assessment or grading practices that you feel the pandemic brought to the forefront. Thank you.
So, Starr, I'd love to start this one with you. I know that your books on this particular topic have supported educators and everywhere in improving practice. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic.
Man, it's a big one, and to keep it very short is tough. But I think the equitable issues that have sort of come to the front during the pandemic is the most glaringly obvious problem, although there are so many things that fit under that lens from, even just whether or not families have working internet to be able to do the work, things we take points off to, kind of like what Matt was saying about how, learning rather than earning. So this whole idea of points accumulated in this environment, I think a lot of folks have had to take stock in, how am I assessing? What am I assessing? Where am I getting that clarity that needs to be conveyed? And how can I leverage parent partnerships and community partnerships to really support children through this really complicated and traumatic time? And we have to prioritize differently because the content can't be what's most important when we're dealing with young people who have family members and community members who are unfortunately dying around them with everything that was going on. So I think it would be tone deaf for us to keep moving on as business as usual when it was far from business as usual. And I think that, I saw and have worked with a lot of districts who started changing their assessment policies, getting rid of lateness issues, really being more cognizant of the formative versus summative, giving kids a lot of practice opportunities. So, those are some of the flaws in our system, but I'm sure the other folks have more to add, and I don't want to eat it all up in my first shot. So
no problem. Thanks for getting us started.
Mm-hmm.
Matt, would you like to?
Yeah. I think what Starr said is so true and important. And I don't know, it's almost like there was a giant spotlight that just kind of like came down amidst the pandemic. I remember an Associated Press headline, something like schools confronting off the rails grading, concerns or issues or failing grades or something like that. And like, it was almost like there's a giant spotlight now on schools and grading practices and things like that. Like back in the day before COVID-19, we might have said, well, oh my gosh, students who maybe don't have as much support at home aren't as likely to get their homework assignments done or something like that. And yeah, we might provide lip service to that. But I think what Starr is saying, and I agree, is that, whoa, like people are actually seeing that and realizing it. And they'd be like turning this way, that way, and like seeing it in their neighbors, their friends, even folks who maybe in the past wouldn't have been viewed as like having that struggle. We were all experiencing that struggle to a certain extent. My second grader last night was like, yeah, we didn't do a whole lot of the homework back in the day. Like he was like even saying like, we even do a whole lot of homework, and we're an educated family, just realizing that's been so different for so many of us because of stuff that got thrown our way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Jeff, I'd love to see if you'd like to add to that too.
Yeah, Starr and Matt have really encapsulated so much. I think what it also pointed out to us is that we have some absolutely amazing and talented educators and leaders across our nation's schools. And so they persist. And so their work has been fantastic. I think the challenge that the pandemic showed us is that we don't have that systematized. We don't have that in a systemic way. So we talk about equity here. So if you're in a space where you don't have an opportunity to be engaged and to be exposed to one of those dynamic teachers or leaders, it's really become evident when you're in through this pandemic. And so I go back to my standpoint is, how do we really create those systems, those processes that are consistent and frequent to ensure that every student has an opportunity? And I think that this pandemic has shown us that we now have an opportunity with the possibility of going back to a similar situation. What are we going to do differently now? Have we learned? Are we going to do anything different? When we had limited ways of assessing what students know and are able to do, now do we recognize that? Are we going to go back to continuing to have limited ways in which students show us and which we assess what they learn and are able to do? Or are we going to think of something? We could think of more? Are we going to extend our thinking? Are we going to open up our mindset? And I think that's critically important for us. We have this, the pandemic and everything that has brought the institutional racism and all the issues that have been brought up through the pandemics that we've been experiencing have been woeful, have been challenging. But there also is the potential for something great here. We have an opportunity to do something different for our kids. Yep. We have an opportunity to make a change.
And you're right, Jeff. Like right now it's in front of us. And are we going to seize that opportunity? Like that's almost keeps me up at night, except for my kids do that. But you know what I'm saying? Like it keeps us up as like thinking about, are we just going to let it slide on by? Because now the world's opening back up again to a certain extent. I don't know. I'm with you.
You just totally spoke to my greatest fear. Like there have been a lot of things that have happened this year that have been super challenging, but so many folks have risen and taken huge risks. And we've lived without, in a lot of states, in New York, for example, we haven't had standardized tests. They've gotten rid of them, and we've been able to see that you could live without them. People do talk about learning loss, but I think that there's a lot more learning happening than people are giving folks credit for. And we've also learned that some kids really thrive in the virtual environment. So there's so many positive things that have come out of a really trying situation that it would be a travesty for us to ignore all the learning that has happened for the sake of comfort to go back to what was comfortable before.
Yeah, well, so interesting because as human beings, we're creatures of habit. So we like to go back to what is comfortable. So to your point, Starr, I mean, we've had to adjust and adapt to be in this online world. So it would be concerning for us if we make a transition back and we don't consider the value and the importance of online learning, right? So we've got to I think we have to expand our mindsets to say that, listen, students learn a myriad of ways. And so we have to be prepared with a myriad of different opportunities for them. And so that it could include online learning as well as other strategies.
Jeff, I bet everyone in this room has heard this, right? Like if we just give like assessments to students in an online virtual format and they're of low cognitive complexity, how are we going to stop them from Googling the answers, right? But like, that existed in 2018 and 17, that same mindset. I mean, we could all pull out books and authors and folks that were saying that. But now again, the the light shining down, and Jeff's saying, "Oh, put a system behind it," and Starr's like, "We got to keep talking about this."
Yep.
Count me in. 2 thumbs up agreeing with that.
Could not agree more, my friends. And what a great discussion already getting us going here. Audience, I want to just share out there. We'd love to hear your thoughts and comments on these ideas. And you're speaking to my heart here. As a systems thinker myself, we have an opportunity. I'm so glad that you brought about that positive aspect of this. We've been disrupted. It's been unpleasant, but you know what? We can do better. Let's go. I love this. So thank you so much. We're going to turn now to another question and keep the conversation going. This is question 2, brought to us by Rachel Harmon. Rachel is a middle school math teacher in Colegio Jorge Washington in Colombia. She is here for us today with a question. Let's see what she wants to know.
Good morning. I am Heather Davis-Schmidt, Superintendent of Target Range School District in Missoula, Montana. My question is, how might traditional assessment and grading practices exaggerate inequities across school systems and classrooms?
And you'll notice that was not Rachel Harmon. Rachel's talking now. But that is a good friend of ours, Heather. We're so glad to have her ask our question for us here. And Matt, why don't you get us started off with this one?
Yeah, I thought it was a good question. And I think it really builds upon some of the things that Jeff and Starr and I were sharing. One of the things I found out, and again, I'm in the ed leadership world, so I work with future principals and superintendents. But in some of the research that I've read and done, what I've found is that both teachers and school leaders have often never thought and often never been taught how to do this assessment and grading thing well. Mm-hmm. Let me say it again. I don't think I've seen, I've observed, and I've read about our teachers, administrators. They have often never thought and often never been taught how to do this assessment and grading thing well. Here's what I mean, right? So when I was a teacher, I was a math teacher, I used to say, hey, students, if you bring these specific supplies to class, I will give you extra credit, right? Like, 5 points here, 5 points there, whatever. Like, and the reason I did that is because that's how I experienced school back in the day. Not to get too crazy theory on y'all here, but there's this idea called the apprenticeship of observation. Out there. It's a theory you can all, research and Google and things like that. Basically just says like, we often do things as educators because that's how we experienced it. Okay. Dan Laurie's the guy, you can look it up, right? So if we've never thought about it or never been taught, we're going to continue to perpetuate the things that we've always done. And Jeff's like, that's a part of this system we're trying to work within and kind of operationalize. Here's what Jeff's going to say in just a moment. I guarantee it, right? So educators, we tend to hand out participation and attendance points like they're popcorn at a baseball game. You get these points, but there's problems with that, right? Myself as a white male, you can imagine there are things I think do on purpose or not on purpose that may not be equitable in the way I do that, right? So that can really be a challenge for us as educators, for me as an educator. I'm just gonna say maybe just me as an educator, maybe nobody else, just me. But in what I've read and what I've observed, we've never thought and we've never been taught how to do this well. So what's that going to take? It's going to take for us to learn some lessons, some things that we're trying out right now in the midst of the pandemic and saying, hey, you know what? These things are kind of working in the midst of the pandemic, or they could work if we revise and improve upon them. Mm-hmm. And so how can we use that moving forward? Here's an example, right? We were totally crazy flexible with students most schools were back in spring of 2020 in our grading and assessment practices. And so how can we continue to be more crazy flexible with deadlines and things like that? Not like saying, oh, you can just turn in stuff, 5 years from now. I'm not talking about that, but how can we be more flexible and understanding, knowing that students learn at different rates and different paces. And that's a more equitable approach to assessment and grading that we were forced to really try out amidst the pandemic, that we could continue to utilize in 2021, 2022, 2023, and beyond. Again, it's going to take systems. It's going to take learning for our teachers and educators, but I think we can do it. I think we can really do it.
Jeffy's calling on you for some systems thinking.
What do you
think?
I was going to say, not only can do it, Matt and Starr, but we have to do it. It's our charge. I mean, I used to say to my principals and my teachers in a simple statement, I say, we don't have the right to mess up their learning opportunities. We have our education. So we're charged with what can we do, the best that we can do to provide for our kids. And so it is about, to me, when you talk about our practice exaggerate the inequities, of course, there's so many inequities that have been exposed. But again, I want to look at this from an asset base, look at this from a positive mindset. So we also have an opportunity to look and say that, hey, our students and our teachers bring with them information about who they are and what they can do that we don't even access, that we don't even consider. So we think about how we're going to assess how students learn. Do we already know what they bring to this conversation? You know, and how are we drawing into that information? How we ensure? I mean, there are a lot of learning theorists out there. I really appreciate a lot of them, but Khalifa Muhammad talks all about culture responsiveness and leadership, and how we have to have leaders who are responsive to the cultures within their school, not just the single culture of the school, but the very cultures that exist within that school. And all those students ascribe and are connected to those cultures. And so when we talk about whether we're teaching, or we talk about learning, or how we're assessing that learning, all those are critically important. And we have to understand that students don't come to us in this process, in this engagement, in this relationship in a vacuum. And so part of our consideration needs to be those. And that's what begins to allow us to address some of the inequities that we see, because we perceive that there is one boat, there's one culture, there's one way. And so if students don't ascribe to that one way, then we start to look at it from a deficit perspective. Well, what's wrong with, what can we better do to improve these students? Instead of looking at the mindset of what do they bring? What are their skill sets, their knowledge and abilities? What is it about their cultures and their way of understanding and being that we need to have a better understanding of, so that we can provide a school culture to create those conditions that allow for some of these outcomes that we think are necessary. So really it's about change, and change happens all the time. It's necessary. And so to Matt's part, he said earlier, it's concerning for us where we are still doing today for our kids what was happening 50 years ago. Our kids are evolving and growing and changing. And so therefore, our schools must also evolve and change if they're going to best meet the needs of our students.
Totally singing my heart song right now, Jeff, in so many ways. I'm reminded of what Dr. Floyd Cobb and John Cranapple say about honoring the dignity of the kids that we work with and building a culture of belonging in schools. Because if we truly want to have an inclusive learning environment, we need to speak to really honoring the dignity of the kids and the adults who are in a building. And I think that coming at it from a strengths mindset, which I speak to a lot in assessing with respect, and abandoning that deficit model. And it starts by building really good relationships with kids, understanding their strengths, knowing what they bring to the table, so that we can co-design curriculum that work for them and not for us. And for too long, curriculum has really been this stagnant thing that has been determined by people who haven't been in a classroom in a really long time, the folks who make the state requirements for graduation, which I think all of this needs to be overhauled, down to the idea of even grade levels, when you have kids who could be leveling up, so to speak, a lot faster if that's where they are in certain areas. And just this idea of being flexible, like Matt was saying before, where we identify what kids know and can do. We provide them with opportunities that work for them, give them lots of choice in what that looks like, so that there's not one product that is the right way to do things. Our culture, I think, for too long has valued written work over other kinds of work, which doesn't work for every culture, unfortunately. Yeah. And I think that even just having this knowledge that there are multiple ways to show what you know, and none of them is better than another one. As long as kids can identify and speak to what they know and can do and share it with a teacher in a way that they can assess it appropriately.
Excellent. May I say one thing just really quick?
For sure.
And Starr, I think you're right on point, because what you're really speaking to is for folks who are concerned, for folks who are saying, hey, you know what? What's the issue here? I don't see a problem. My kid is doing great. This is what we're talking about, is not excluding things, not taking things out. We're valuing what we're saying. There we go. The dog is affirming that. Affirming that. But it's about inclusiveness. So listen. So there's nothing. I'm an English teacher. I'm an English teacher by training. I love writing. There's nothing wrong with writing, but we also know that there's different ways for students to communicate what they know and are able to do. So we're not saying get rid of writing, but we're saying we should be adding to that. We should be looking for other opportunities because we're missing opportunities to get to know what our students bring, what they offer, because we're giving them a limited perspective. And kids are not myopic. They're not limited. They're whole, rich beings with many, and they're growing and they're learning. So they're learning what their talents and skills are. And we should be meeting them there. We should be meeting with them and taking that journey with them and walking with them and taking the time to help them learn what they know about themselves. It's a critically important process, I believe.
I love that mindset of walking that journey with them too. And I want to share some exciting comments here from our audience that, by the way, continues to grow and continues to represent from more countries even. But we have Catherine Sook here with us today, who's saying she is thrilled to take the leap to create this paradigm shift for her pre-service teachers so that they can make the change when they become teachers.
Excellent.
Speaking my language.
Yep.
It's scary, but it has to happen. And we so commend you for that, Catherine. That is impacting the future for our students. Wonderful. Thank you all so much. And just a quick reminder, my friends out there watching today, just hope you're enjoying this show. Remember to hit that like, follow, and subscribe button so you can stay up to date with all of the latest content from SchoolRubric and leading voices just such as those alongside me today from education around the world. Question number 3 comes to us from Chicagoland, where Nick Joe is a former math teacher and currently a professional learning consultant at NWEA. Let's hear what Nick has to ask the panel.
Hey everyone, my name is Nick Joe. I am from the Chicagoland area and a professional learning consultant with NWEA. It's spring of 2021, over a year since the proverbial rug has been pulled out from under us. And we've seen plenty of examples of assessment and grading practices that do not work. What do you see as the persistent obstacles to actual change in these areas?
Now, I'm going to actually take an opportunity here before I start all of you off. We have a pretty engaged audience out there today. I want to challenge them. I want them to share with us. What has been an obstacle for you out there? What has potentially stood in your way of making a change? And we've got some expert voices right alongside me. So we're going to share their ideas in just response to the question, but we'd certainly love to incorporate some of the things that are directly being experienced out there by our audience. Jeff, I'd love to start with you.
Oh, great.
What would you like to say back with Nick's question here?
Well, first of all, shout out to Nick. He's a great person, by the way. I couldn't miss that opportunity. Both Nick and Heather, fantastic people. Honored to be working with them. You know, I'll tell you, as a university learning facilitator, which is an adjunct faculty member, and a director of school improvement services, you know, my answer is going to be sort of not too surprising. So, but it's simple, but I think it's so true, because I think sometimes we miss the simplicity. I think the biggest obstacle to the measurable change that we all seek is us. Yeah. And I'll tell you, when you talk about, and again, I said from the onset, I'm a systems theorist. So when I think about things like, you know, when you look at the work of David Stroh and Peter Senge and these people who are just pivotal theorists in the area of systems thinking and leadership and change, and they all talk about how, you know, we have these mental models, you know, these values, these beliefs, these assumptions that we have that unfortunately our lack of awareness of them and to really analyze them often limit our ability to actualize the outcomes that we want to seek. And so part of that is, how do we recognize that our mental models might be part of the challenges that we have? I mean, goodness gracious, go back to the comment that Matt said. It's so true. You can walk into some learning spaces, not all, but some learning spaces, and you think you hit a time warp because somebody walked into that space and said, this is how kids learn. But they didn't realize that the kids from now are different from the kids from 50 years ago. So maybe kids might learn differently. And so when we have those mindsets, like, what's the challenge? What's the problem? We really have to push against that. We've got to push. So our biggest obstacle is our mindsets and our values and our systems and our assumptions that lead to the decisions that we make that impact the students, the staff, and the parents and the families in this whole education process. And so I think that's where the pushback needs to be. And that's where I would challenge folks to say, how willing are you to be vulnerable to taking an assessment as to how you think, and to realize how that maybe you might need to adjust your thinking in order to give kids a chance.
Mm-hmm. No, I think what Jeff said is spot on there. I want to add to it, maybe just from a different angle. Since I'm kind of the school leadership, like that's my world, school leadership. And actually, I think it was a comment that just popped up here from Ken O'Connor about school administrators. So that's definitely my lens, right? Assessment illiterate administrators, that they're requiring these, crazy practices. Even Ken O'Connor's comment is helpful here, but to add to that, maybe even in the midst of the pandemic or before that, we would see school leaders saying, oh, well, we need to get rid of the zero, or we need to start doing redos and retakes for half credit or something. What I'd call like these like incremental changes. And then there'd be like this giant pushback, right? Because that's not the way we've always done it. And there's a really wonderful article out there called Starting the Conversation About Grading by Susan Brookhart. And she says, hey, if we lead with these like little tiny incremental grading fixes or assessment fixes, that we're probably gonna receive pushback, because as a school system, we have not first started with what the purpose of all of this ought to be. Like, we're channeling our Simon Sinek right now, start with the why, right? And so if and when we say that the purpose of grading is to communicate students' current levels of learning, if we say that's why we're doing this, and when we do it, it will create more equitable opportunities and outcomes for students. If and when we do that, all of these other practices will be like a domino effect. Why wouldn't we do those things? And so instead of like focusing in on this little change or that little change, take a step back, school leaders, take a step back, school boards, take a step back, directors of school improvement, take a step back, all of us, and say, what's the purpose of all this? Because if it's not, we're going to continue handing out participation points like it is popcorn at a ball game, because that's what people are used to getting, is popcorn. And we got to move away from that. And again, that's just my experience as a teacher who used to do that, as an administrator used to do that. And we got to move on. Star's like chomping at the bit. Like,
I am. Because I'm going to
go.
push back a little bit, even on the grading piece altogether.
Right, yeah, okay.
Coming from the other end of the spectrum, as a teacher who routinely pushed back on traditional beliefs and routinely was chastised and alienated by my colleagues and was traditionally misunderstood by my administrators. They did very fortunately at least leave me alone enough to, as they saw the value of what I was doing when I was in the classroom. And I think when they saw how positive an impact reflection could have on assessment, how that could invite student voice into the conversation, because what I learned in that process as an educator is my assessments were bad. Like, honestly, like, I thought I was being clear. The directions were very clear to me. But when you have 34 students and you get 20 different assessments back after you hand it out, that's not them that's problematic. That's you that's problematic. So when I opened up this opportunity to talk to kids about what they thought they were supposed to be doing, and then I assessed them through that lens rather than the lens that I had intended, I was better able to get accurate data of what they knew and could do, and was then also able to kind of shift it. And I think that we could talk little fixes all the time, like you were saying, Matt, but it's not going to move. It's not going to move enough to the kind of change that needs to really happen. We need to remove labels from learning, period. We need to think about progressions of mastery and competency, and thinking in terms of developing skills and content within students over time, and letting them find themselves on that progression, and just continually give them feedback on where they are so that they could keep moving forward. And we need to be listening to them while it's happening, because often, like I said, when we're designing assessments, they only assess a very small fraction of what we've taught. So if kids are taking in so much more of what's going on, we need to give them a lot of opportunities to share the depth of what they know, and in not just one way. So having that reflection, giving them a portfolio to collect their learning and really progress over time, being able to articulate it, then you've got a winner altogether there.
Yeah, if I could pop in, I just affirming and just kind of reaffirming that notion that how critically important it is to allow opportunities for students to practice with meaningful feedback before there's any type of assessment that occurs. And also to give them multiple opportunities in very different ways to show us what they know. I think those two factors are really critically important in grading assessment, and they don't happen on a consistent basis. And they're typically not systematized. I'll go back to that notion. It's typically not, it is what you will find is you'll find amazing teachers like Starr who feel like I'm out here by myself trying to do the best thing for my kids, and you'll find pockets of excellence, right? So how do we move beyond pockets of excellence to, because here's the situation. What if I'm a kid in the school and I don't have that opportunity to be in Miss Sackstein's classroom? What if I miss that opportunity, right? And so it's that level of, if those are also inequities, right? So, if you happen to get that good teacher there who's going to be open, we have to remove those situations because we know that they are not what's in the best interest of our students as learners. And so we've got to start changing our mindset so we can change the behaviors, including the decisions that we make that impact that type of, those type of scenarios.
Yeah, I want to build upon that too. I think it was John here in the chat that said something about, reporting grades out of 100, and Kara was saying the grade book and all that stuff. And I hear, Starr saying, let's rethink what all that looks like and thinks about. Sometimes I want to, even though I'm in the ivory tower, right? Let's be honest, right? Townsley is the professor, one of the professors here. Okay, not in the ivory. Here is like, if you're a teacher today, you're an administrator today, here's a takeaway. Print out a grade book, like print out an electronic grade book sample from whatever your electronic grade book is, right? Get a pen, get a highlighter, highlight stuff that honestly was just for feedback purposes, but we just happened to put a number on it. We didn't need to, but we did. Get out another highlighter, highlight stuff that honestly was just compliance and completion, participation, whatever. Highlight that. And then circle the stuff in the grade book that really was intended to be after all of that feedback stuff. Here is what they were supposed to have learned. We just happened to slap a number on it. That is a wonderful exercise for us to examine what's the purpose of grading. How do we assess students in our classes, in our schools? Like that itself should be like a light bulb moment. Whoa. And then someone right now in the chat saying, and by the way, even once we do have that circle around the stuff that actually was learning, what the heck does 86 out of 100 mean? What was that, 14? So we have trained ourselves, we have trained our parents to highly depend upon that. Now I'm not old, but also old enough to remember when electronic grade books were getting pushed out. We told our parents, we told our students to sign up, and make sure that you're getting the text messages and emails to know when the assignments are in there. And it was all about, to go to channel my earlier self, all about earning rather than learning. And so we're going to have to undo that whole mindset of getting our inboxes pinged with stuff. And that stuff is not really learning. It's just a documentation of something being done or some feedback that should have been qualitative rather than a 4 out of 6. And I get it. Unlearning all of that stuff can be challenging, but somebody out there in SchoolRubric, EW, Educators Without Borders, are can I get a hearty amen for Starr and Jeff for starting this conversation? Because I just want to be the person saying, yes, they have said it, and I agree.
I will say amen to that. And I will say from personal experience at the secondary level, and I know, Matt, that's a particular area of your work. Online grade book often stand in the way of your best intentions. But Jeff, mindset before changing behaviors. All about purpose, all about why. I love it.
John, I'm with you. John, keep typing stuff in the chat. John,
I will say this, though. There are ways to manipulate an online grade book. And I will say that the folks that I worked with when I was in New York City public schools, scheduler they were at the time, I went straight to their software people and were like, I need this to do this. Because what it's doing right now does not support what I'm trying to accomplish in my space. So as educators, we also have to feel empowered sometimes to take that next step when the tools we're given don't do what we need them to do.
So true.
And sometimes we don't know unless we ask. So we just have to find the right person to ask and see what we could do to make change happen, because no one's going to do it for us.
Yeah.
So
persist.
Yeah.
And I love a comment here too from the very one who asked our question, Nick Joe. A big factor is having a safe space provided by our school to try those alternative grading practices. A lack of safety leads to that fear, which will inevitably have us not take risks. So thanks for adding that in there, Nick. Wonderful. What I do want to highlight as well, speaking of all of these areas, that if you are out there watching and listening, you have a chance to win a free book that could give you even more practical strategies in this area. To win a copy of the book, brand new, a hot off the press, Going Gradeless by David Frangiosa and Elise Burns, just make a comment and click on the link that's going to be shared out by the SchoolRubric producers to be entered to win. Our next question does actually come to us from Rachel Harmon, who is a middle school math teacher in Columbia. Let's hear what Rachel has to say.
Teachers and leaders have undergone an immense upheaval this year. What are some assessment practices you've seen implemented because of the pandemic that you hope will stick?
All right, Starr, I'd love to hear you start us off with this one.
So I think Matt spoke to this a little bit before in terms of flexibility. A lot less of this compliance idea that they have to submit in order to get points. I think that I've noticed a spike in people reading Hacking Assessment, people reaching out to me on the side, actively looking for alternative assessment practices, and really trying to understand what kids' lives are like at home. And also on that systems level, I've worked with a couple of systems in Delaware that are seeking to really put policies in place that have arisen out of the pandemic into permanence moving forward. And I think that that comes with like the whole formative practice not being assessed, giving kids multiple opportunities, as you said before, Jeff, and really just giving lots and lots and lots of feedback. Getting the kids more involved in giving peer feedback, getting the kids involved in determining what their assessments look like, which I think is also a huge piece of what's going on. So I think that's a good starting off of some of the great things I've seen going on. And I think because the standardized tests have been kind of silenced for a bit, folks have been taking more risks. And I would certainly love to see people continuing to take risks in this area.
That's a really interesting point about the removal of some of those standardized assessments at the end. Jeff, anything you'd like to add there?
Yeah, I think to the point of our teachers being, it's pushed teachers to be creative. And so, you know, what I've seen evidence of is teachers initially coming in their comfort zone, but then realizing that, you know, I can't do what I've always done. So let me try something a little different. So in an odd way, I think because of the way they have to work with our students, you've seen some teachers who are more emboldened to be inventive, who realize that, you know, I have a limited communication, so I have to do something a little bit different today. And I think that that's an asset that we should carry over when we move into, you know, the eventuality that we're moving over to, so we don't lose any opportunities we have to allow our teachers to be creative and to be innovative. When our teachers are innovative, our students blossom and bloom. So any of those opportunities that we can see that. And the thing I was mentioned too, you know, that we talked about is not just allowing the innovation that we're seeing more of, but also just encouraging. I would say not just feedback, but feedback and praise tend to be kind of blended a little bit, but looking at the type of feedback that teachers have to give students in this space, right? So that they're moving beyond the idea of just giving praise and realizing that feedback is going to be a little more important, because praise in that one-on-one physical situation, when you're in someone's space, you know, you can give that nonverbal kind of gesture thing, but when you don't have that ability to do that, your feedback is more important than your praise because of that computer screen or that kind of distance. And so you're noticing, at least I've seen some opportunities where I'm hearing and have received, because I have school age kids too, that the teachers are really trying to be more mindful about giving kids meaningful feedback, explicit, meaningful feedback, as opposed to what I think I saw. You see a lot of just praise, which was good. Don't get me wrong, kids need to be praised, but it doesn't help them move them further along the learning continuum. So.
think that's a distinction between feedback and praise for sure. And I think you're right. I've seen a lot of evidence of teachers getting very creative because they had to, but nonetheless, those are strategies that they can continue forward. Sure. Matt, any thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, I think there's actually, I don't think I know. There was a 1-2 punch. The first 1-2, the first one is like this online, we're not going to Google it. So a higher level of cognitive complexity had to happen. One, somebody in the chat mentioned this, and I think it builds on it too. Sometimes the linchpin education has been standardized tests, ACT, SAT, the state test, whatever, and that tends to be of lower cognitive complexity. Why? Because in order to actually assess students' higher levels of cognitive complexity, it costs time, which means money in the standardized test world. So just by nature of efficiencies, states tend to have assessments that are of lower cognitive complexity. So with the removal of those at the state level, and at least here in the US, there's been a ton of colleges and universities that are going test optional, which was already a movement happening before COVID, which expanded in the midst of COVID. So we've got teachers realizing they ought to be assessing at a higher level because of online, virtual, hybrid learning. There's a lower emphasis on college admissions and standardized tests because there's no state tests in some states, and colleges are waiving it. Oh my gosh, higher cognitive complexity. Linchpin's no longer there, requiring us to be at a lower level cognitive complexity. Whoa, let's talk about Bloom's. Let's talk about Webb's depth of knowledge, whatever taxonomy you want to use. Now we're talking about again, like Bloom's is so old, but yet still so new. And so we're talking about that stuff now again in our educational leadership world, which to me is fantastic, right? But now, like, folks like Starr, otherwise, like, how do we actually create assessments? How do we think about providing feedback like that? How do we do that in a meaningful way that's efficient and timely? And again, goes back to what I was saying earlier. If we've never been taught that initially, if we're just really good at creating multiple choice tests with, a couple of, possible ones that might trick you and one good one, like, I don't know how to do that. And Starr's like, I can teach you, or whatever, whoever.
Well, I mean, it's funny you should say that, Matt, because like I moved away from traditional testing, even in my AP classes when I was teaching, because as somebody who has a BA in English, British and American literature, not once in the 4 years that I attended college did I take a multiple choice about literature. That just was not something that ever occurred. Did I have to write tons of papers? Did I have to engage in dialogues and Socratic seminars? Yes. Critically thinking about the text, thinking about the context in which I'm reading it through, thinking about different lenses to see those ideas through. Yes. So with those higher level kinds of ways of thinking, we need to give kids these entry points that let them see the learning in a lot of different ways. And I think when we think about those shifts happening and changing assessment in general, just we want them to be anchored in real problem or project-based, multidisciplinary at once, where they're taking what they know and they're applying it to a lot of different things so that they have that transfer happening and they have that higher level understanding, which I think is something that we really want to see in kids, which, coming back to their ability, the ability for them to then articulate what they know and can do, because it's almost, again, the kid voice has been left out of this conversation a little too long. So when we use reflection and we give them the tools to understand the language of competency so that they could say to me, I am still having trouble with developing cohesion in my essays, and they can articulate that need to me, then I know exactly the tools I need to provide for them and the feedback that I'm giving. But they can't advocate for themselves if we don't give them the opportunities to do that, and we don't give them the language and the tools to do it effectively. So that has to be a part of this conversation too. How are we inviting that kid voice into what's going on, and how are we effectively giving them the tools and the language to ask for what they need, and then listening enough to do it, which is the other part of that for sure.
That listening is a key component. You're absolutely right. We have a colleague that speaks of this assessment empowerment, bringing those students in on that journey with you. And so that's a fantastic ending to that question. And I hate to move us on to the final question because the conversation's been so rich, but we do still have one more. And this is our final question this evening, depending where you're located in the world. I want you all out there to keep your pens and paper ready for some more takeaways. So let's hear from Dr. Rob Thornell in Texas.
Hey guys, this is Rob from Fort Worth, Texas. And I was just wondering, with all the uncertainties going on in the world right now and everybody recognizing the need for change, what is the one thing you would tell teachers or leaders that they could be doing right now to positively impact students this fall? Thanks.
Wow, Rob.
I want to make sure we hear from everyone for this one. But Jeff, let's start with you. What's that final words?
That's a great question, Rob. So thank you so much. First of all, before I make I just got to say thank you. So thank you to the educators, the teachers, and the leaders who have been teaching during this challenging time and continue to remain teaching, and were teaching beforehand. So just to recognize in this public forum that they're amazing, and we appreciate all that they have been doing. And our comments are because we're committed to continuous improvement. It's not that we're saying anything negative or that it's a negative criticism. It's really just trying to push and force the idea of growth. So the thing I think that we can work on now is kind of similar to a theme I've been trying to articulate today. So not too surprising, but it's in the context of what we control. And so I would really encourage us right now to continue to hone our skills as reflective practitioners. Mm-hmm. Because in other professions, in other organizations, reflective practicing is the norm. In education as a profession, we need to really focus on that. And I mean in more formalized matters. And the second thing I'd also say is asset mindset. We're talking about our kids, folks. We're talking about human beings who are evolving and growing. We have to be positive. Doesn't mean we can't be practical. Doesn't mean we have to be naive, but we also have to be positive. So asset mindset and reflective practitioner. I think our thoughts and our actions really need to be strategically designed in such a way that they help us create those cultural conditions I was talking about earlier, those cultural conditions in schools and in school districts that will allow for the opportunity to have those equitable relationships that we talk about that can lead to the positive outcomes that we're all trying to seek. And so that would be my all-inclusive things. Those are things that you can work on. Your supervisor, there's no one over you. And I know sometimes we got people in middle-level leadership and you got people above you, but you can, as a professional, you can work on being a reflective practitioner, and you can work on your mindset, regardless of who is above you or below you, or next to you for that matter.
Powerful. Thank you, Jeff. Matt, I'm going to pass it to you.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. Thanks, Jeff. I'm giving you like the Optimist Award today, Jeff. You're just such a positive guy. I love that. I love it. Love it. For me, I just go back to something also I said earlier. Just interrogate the grade book, right? Like if you're looking for something to do this fall, print out your grade book from the spring. Start highlighting the stuff that's really more about earning. Circle the stuff that's more about learning. And I think ask yourself, what do you want the purpose of grading to be in your school, in your classroom, in your school district? That's what was helpful for me back in the day. And I think the pandemic is giving us a reason why. So if you're looking for something to do here this spring to get ready for this fall, interrogate the grade book. Ask yourself what the purpose of grading is.
Fantastic. Spring is a great time, albeit fall seems like a long way away right now. It's a great time to reflect. Right, Jeff? And Starr, hate to say our last opportunity here, but we look forward to hearing what you have to say as well.
A lot to that as well. I mean, what I would say is survey your kids. Find out what worked for them. Find out what changes they might suggest for future kids in that space. To ask them why they felt the way that they did. Reach out to your parents in the community. See what kind of supports could go on there. One of the things I've definitely been really thinking about over this last year is teachers need support. They want to make changes. They want to do what's best for kids. I believe that 98% of teachers always think kids first. Sometimes they don't know how. And it's our job to help them, support them out of that fear so that they have a how to go to. So, another takeaway would be, let's provide really practical, manageable ways to help teachers this summer prepare so that they could feel really confident going into next year, regardless of what that looks like. So kid and community voices, get those involved. and support the folks who are the ones who are actually doing all the really hard work, the teachers, because they want to do what's best. So let's help them do that.
Phenomenal way to end this conversation, my friends. This has been absolutely outstanding. I also want to extend a thank you to those who are out there listening and watching today. We hope you have enjoyed. They are here from all over the world, and we are so appreciative. We do also, again, want to thank those who have helped us make this possible, and that's Ed to Market, Katie Stoddard, Forefront Education, and the generous donors of the book for the giveaway today, authors David Frangiosa and Elise Burns. Today's conversation does not have to stop here either. We encourage you out there to join us in our SchoolRubric Facebook group, Global Educators Network. Feel free to find us on Facebook and enjoy continuing the conversation around today's topic as well as others. I do really want to challenge everyone out there today to really reflect on the ideas, the discussions that we had, practical strategies, shifts in mindset, ideas you can implement literally today, tomorrow, and onward into your classroom. We are ending what we could easily agree upon has been the toughest year in the history of education. Teachers, you have survived, you have persevered, but let's look at this as an opportunity. We have disrupted things. Let's go forward. Let's support students. Let's think about these practices and how, as the colleagues alongside me today have helped inform you, to make changes that benefit every single student that we serve. I hope you gained as much from this panel as I did. I know I'm going to have to watch it again to make sure I pull out all of the tidbits and nuggets. I wish everyone out there a restful summer and an inspiring start to the new year with better assessment and grading practices in every classroom. Thank you all, and thank you to my colleagues here, Jeff, Matt, and Starr. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you for watching School Rubric's Educators Without Borders. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel where we highlight voices and perspectives of educational leaders across the globe. To stay in the know with our latest upcoming panels, interviews, tutorials, and more, make sure that you follow us on social media or visit us at SchoolRubric.com. Thank you.